Hello, church family. Welcome to today's Sunday school lesson. We are in session 5, Return, and our key idea this week is repentance of sin can stop its spiraling effects. And we are in 1 Kings chapter 15, verses 9 through 22. But before we start, let's ask the question, in what ways is our past present? What makes breaking from the past so challenging? So what that first question means is, in what ways is our past still lingering with us? In what way are we still suffering the consequences of choices made in the past? Past actions define an organization or group. If a group does something politically, there will be people who remember that, whether good or bad. If a company does something that is less than great, chances are people will remember that for a long time, and boycotts will happen. It might even drive that company, either their stock prices down or their business down so much that they go out of business. Change involves creating a new identity even when most were comfortable with the old identity. So this week what we're going to be looking at is King Asa, who is the grandson of King Rehoboam, the son of King Solomon, and so therefore the grandson of King Rehoboam, therefore the great grandson of King Solomon, and the great grandson of King David. So just for some context, Solomon ruled. Solomon did a lot of great things. He built the temple, he built the palace. But he let his heart be turned by having a lot of foreign wives. He intermarried with too many of the foreign nations around Israel. He allowed his heart to be turned to their gods and their idols, and he did not walk in a way that was pleasing to the Lord at the end of his life. And then his son Rehoboam assumed the throne, and we read last week that he was just as bad, if not worse, than Solomon in the way that he idolized other gods, other nations' gods, rather. He worsened the amount of forced labor in the city of Jerusalem. He listened to the council of peers instead of the council of his elders. And so after that, there was so Rehoboam ruled for 17 years, and then his son Abijah ruled for 3 years. He was a young man, but he also ruled and walked in all the sins of his father before him had committed, and he was not wholeheartedly devoted to the Lord as his God, the Lord his God, as his ancestor David had been. Sorry about that. So now his son Asa has assumed the throne. Now, a lot has happened between last week and this week. We are skipping about 3 chapters from chapter 12 to chapter 15, and in those 3 intermediary chapters, we have a couple of confusing accounts. First of all, Jeroboam, who was an advisor to King Rehoboam, an advisor, but a spokesperson of the people of Israel to Rehoboam, he took the people of the northern tribes of Israel. He was given them by God with the promise that if he abided by God's statutes and laws and had no other gods before him, that he would have the same promise that God had made with David. Well, Jeroboam failed. He got worried that people were going to go back to Rehoboam, so he began offering sacrifices to other gods in order to win favor, supposedly, with these other gods, to try to keep his people of the northern kingdoms of Israel loyal to him rather than go back to Rehoboam. He did not walk with the Lord, and he eventually died. Then after that, we have an account of a couple of prophets. One is called the man of God from Judah, who was talking to Jeroboam and gave Jeroboam a prophecy about a king named Josiah, who was going to offer a human sacrifice at an altar that Jeroboam was offering a sacrifice at and tore that down. And there was just a couple of confusing things. But now in chapter 15, verse 9, we get to look at King Asa. And how will Asa rule? Would he embrace the idolatrous practices of Solomon, Rehoboam, and Abijah? Would Asa's reign be marked by spiritual rebellion or spiritual renewal? Well, this is titled Return, so we shall see. Let's read together verses 9 through 22. In the 20th year of Israel's king Jeroboam, Asa became king of Judah, and he reigned 41 years in Jerusalem. That is 1 year longer than either Solomon or David, by the way. His grandmother's name was Maacah, daughter of Abishalom. Asa did what was right in the Lord's sight, as his ancestor David had done. He banished the male cult prostitutes from the land and removed all the idols that his ancestors had made. He also removed his grandmother Maacah from being queen mother because she had made an obscene image of Asherah. Asa chopped down her obscene image and burned it in the Kidron Valley. The high places were not taken away, but Asa was wholeheartedly devoted to the Lord his entire life. He brought his father's consecrated gifts and his own consecrated gifts into the Lord's temple, silver, gold, and utensils. There was a war between Asa and King Baasha of Israel throughout their reigns. Israel's King Baasha went to war against Judah. He built Ramah in order to keep anyone from leaving or coming to King Asa of Judah. So Asa withdrew all the silver and gold that remained in the treasuries of the Lord's temple and the treasuries of the royal palace and gave it to his servants. Then King Asa sent them to Ben-Hadad, son of Tabrimmon of Hezion, king of Aram, who lived in Damascus, saying, "There is a treaty between me and you, between my father and your father. Look, I have sent you a gift of silver and gold. Go and break your treaty with King Baasha of Israel, so that he will withdraw from me." Ben-Hadad listened to King Asa and sent the commanders of his armies against the cities of Israel. He attacked Ijon, Dan, Abel-Beth-Maachah, and all of Chinnereth, and the whole land of Naphtali. When Baasha heard about it, he quit building Ramah and stayed in Tirzah. Then King Asa gave a command to everyone, without exception in Judah, and they carried away the stones of Ramah and the timbers Baasha had built it with. Then King Asa built Geba of Benjamin and Mizpah with them. So there's a lot of stuff going on here. Let's look together at the first 7 verses. This is really the most important part about how Asa ruled, and he ruled wholeheartedly devoted to the Lord. In the 20th year of Israel's king Jeroboam, Asa became king of Judah, and he reigned 41 years in Jerusalem. His grandmother's name was Maacah, daughter of Abishalom. Asa did what was right in the Lord's sight, as his ancestor David had done. He banished the male cult prostitutes from the land and removed all of the idols that his ancestors had made. He also removed his grandmother Maacah from being queen mother because she had made an obscene image of Asherah. Asa chopped down her obscene image and burned it in the Kidron Valley. The high places were not taken away, but Asa was wholeheartedly devoted to the Lord his entire life. He brought his father's consecrated gifts and his own consecrated gifts into the Lord's temple, silver, gold, and utensils. So let's start off by looking at how Asa broke tradition that had been set up by Solomon and had permeated the next 3 generations. So Solomon, Rehoboam, Abijah, and now Asa. So now Asa is the 4th, and he breaks tradition. Well, how does he break that tradition? Well, he tears down all of these idols. He removed all of the idols that his ancestors made. He even removed his grandmother, the queen mother, from the palace, from her home, because she had made an idol to Asherah. This this word that is translated into obscene image in verse 13 is the Hebrew word mefletzeth. Mefletzeth. That's how I'm going to say that. And it only occurs 8 times in the Old Testament, and of which all 8 times are in this chapter, 1 Kings chapter 15. And literally that word means horrid thing or terror. So this is something that is abhorrent to the Lord. It's something that is terrifying or terrible in the eyes of the Lord and those who follow him. So what advice would you give to someone who is wanting to break with destructive family traditions or practices? I would give people the advice that if they're going to do it, they need to do it. There cannot be any half measures. If it is a destructive practice, it needs to be done swiftly. It needs to be well known why it is a bad tradition, why it is a bad practice for a family. Just for example, if there is a family that has a history of abuse between fathers and sons and fathers and sons and fathers and sons, and one son wants to break this tradition of abuse, it's going to take drastic measures, but he needs to do that in a way that is drastic so that his kids are not exposed to the same abuse that he was exposed to, whether that means by breaking the cycle by breaking contact with family or making it very clear that this is his family, this is the way they will be treated, and standing up for that. That's the first thing that kind of pops in my mind. Could also work with money or the way we talk to each other or what have you. I would say that it needs to happen quickly. No one would have thought that Asa was like his father. His obedience to God stood in stark contrast to what they had seen in his father and his grandfather. So how does this standard that followed by Asa compare with Jesus' instruction to love the Lord with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength, found in Mark chapter 12, verse 30? Well, the thing is that Asa wasn't perfect. Asa wasn't Jesus, but he was willing to do anything to get. He was willing to do anything he could to make sure that the Lord was followed. He took down all of the idols. He took down all of the things that were abhorrent to the Lord. He kicked his grandmother out of the palace and removed her from her office of Queen Mother. But he's not perfect. If we look at the next section where he bribes Baasha to break his Ben-Hadad to break his treaty with Baasha, then we see that he does something that would be in opposition to what the Lord would command. Reading Cornered, there was a war between Asa and King Baasha of Israel throughout their reigns. Israel's King Baasha went to war against Judah. He built Ramah in order to keep anyone from leaving or coming to King Asa of Judah. So Asa withdrew all the silver and gold that remained in the treasuries of the Lord's temple and the treasuries of the royal palace and gave it to his servants. So he took all of the money that was stored up in the treasuries and gave them to his servants and said, and then sent them to Ben-Hadad and said, "There is a treaty between me and you, between my father and your father. Look, I have sent you a gift of gold and silver. Go and break your treaty with King Baasha of Israel so that he will withdraw from me." So Asa's not flawless. He makes mistakes, and here's one of those mistakes. He was tempted and fell into this temptation to, instead of trusting the Lord to protect him and take care of the nation of Judah from King Baasha, what he did instead was he bribed Ben-Hadad of another nation, the king of another nation, the Hezian king of Aram, who lived in Damascus. So this Damascus king, he bribed him to break the treaty with the guy who was attacking King Asa, instead of trusting the Lord. And he did that because he was backed into a corner. It makes complete sense why he would do this, except for the fact that he did not trust the Lord. So removing the temple silver and gold should have set off internal alarm bells. He shouldn't have been able to have access to those things. Desperation, though, was winning out. He felt cornered. So why then, brothers and sisters, are we easily tempted to depend on our own resources rather than God during times of crisis? I'm not going to call this a crisis right now because we still live very comfortably. A lot of us live comfortably. But right now, with gas prices and grocery prices and inflation the way they are, it can be very easy for us, brothers and sisters, to rely on our own paychecks and go, okay, well, I only make this much every month, and gas has gone up this much, and we use this much gas, so now gas is going to cost, over $1,000 for 2 cars for a month. Just ballpark numbers, and that's a lot of money. I mean, that's a significant amount of money to literally be burning in our cars. And so I think in times of trouble, in times of where, as Brother Richard has talked about in the past, being a bean counter and seeing where the beans aren't going to add up, we take it upon ourselves to either delve into savings or to get second or third jobs to try to make ends meet. And those are not bad things to do. You never want to have to take a second or third job. You never want to have to dip into savings. But what we should do, and before we do those things, out of desperation, we should reach out to the Lord in obedience and remember of His promise that He will take care of us. So, that's what King Asa did wrong. He didn't trust the Lord wholeheartedly. He served the Lord wholeheartedly, but did not trust Him to save him from King Baasha. So he paid this guy off to break a treaty in order for King Baasha to say, oh no, I don't have enough men to take Judah now. And so he retreated from the nation of Judah. But he also stopped building Ramah. This project, Ramah, allowed deserting this project, Ramah. It allowed Asa to go in and rally his people. So did Baasha's retreating, before we get to that, did Baasha's retreating to fight Ben-Hadad justify Asa's actions? Well, I would say that the fact that it withdrew King Baasha from attacking Judah and Jerusalem, I would say yes, that would justify it from a human standpoint. But from the Lord's standpoint, he should have stayed faithful to the Lord and trusting in the Lord and said, no, I don't need outside help. I can do this with the Lord Himself, not with another nation. So how might we be tempted to justify our actions by only focusing on the outcome? Well, for example, here, Asa chose to trust in his own strategy. How often are we guilty of that ourselves? We trust in our own strategy. We can see the end goal, and while the end goal might not be a bad thing, the steps we might take to get to that end goal could spell maybe not necessarily disaster, but could be a time of disobedience or untrustingness, a lack of trust in the Lord in our lives. Overall, Asa received a favorable judgment from the writer of Kings. He stopped Judah's downward spiral into sin and begun under Solomon that had begun under Solomon and continued in the reigns of Rehoboam and Abijah. So finally, let's read the last section where he is called one who, or where it tells us rather what happened after the treaty between Ben-Hadad and King Baasha was broken. Ben-Hadad listened to King Asa and sent the commanders of his armies against the cities of Israel. He attacked Ijon, Dan, Abel-Beth-Maachah, and all of Chinnereth and the whole land of Naphtali. When Baasha learned about it, he quit building Ramah and stayed in Tirzah. Then King Asa gave a command to everyone without exception in Judah, and they carried away the stones of Ramah and the timbers Baasha had built it with. Then King Asa built Geba of Benjamin and Mizpah with them. So how would getting all of Judah involved in dismantling Ramah serve as a rallying point for the people? They needed something to stand behind. They needed an idea. They needed something that would get them all on the same page, working toward the same goal. And here, King Asa had something, and it was dismantling this building project of the city or the fort of Ramah that was built there as a way to keep people out from helping King Asa. And how does this remind the people of God's faithfulness? Well, the Lord did allow it to happen that King Baasha would withdraw from Judah in order to fight Ben-Hadad, and they were able to rally together. They were able to get their act together, so to speak, to worship the Lord God instead of all of these other idols they had been worshiping. So that is our lesson for today. I hope it is an encouragement for you and a reminder for you to be trusting in the Lord, to trust His timing and His way and His providence for us, so that we are not reliant on our own resources or our own power, but rather rely on Him and give Him all the thanks and glory. Thank you so much. I look forward to worshiping with you very soon. Bye-bye.